Hello and welcome to Drawing for Everyone. Today we're going to start with a still life, and I'm going to choose apples as my still life subject today. I like the idea of working with still life because it's very accessible to everybody. Whether you work with fruit or vegetables or objects in your home or flowers, it's very easy to set it up, and it has such a range and diversity of shape, form and colour, it makes it extremely easy to work with. Now, before we start on today's part one, the first thing I'd like to say, and I'm going to reiterate this quite a lot throughout the series of videos that I make, is that drawing and painting is something that everyone can do. Not everybody thinks they can do it, but it's there within you. Now here is the drawing that I've decided to work on. This is a little prep sketch that I did out beforehand, and you know, if you're going to take on any sort of drawing or painting project, it's always a good idea to do some sort of preparatory sketch beforehand, because this gives you the opportunity to familiarize yourself with the shapes and the forms and the colors, and to understand what it is you're trying to do before you try and do your piece proper. Now, when it comes to setting up your still life, it's very easy to do. You can simply take your elements and put them onto your kitchen table and photograph them, or here's something that I like to do and I find very accessible and allows me to be quite dramatic in my setup. I usually use a chair and I place it beside a window, and here you can see with the photographs left and right how I work with it. So I'd have the chair beside the window, and I will have my pieces of paper or sometimes a cloth over the chair, and I have light coming in from the window, and then I'll oftentimes use a ring light to cast a shadow and a different direction onto the subject matter in order to create something a little bit more dramatic in terms of lights and shades, and to create a sense of design through light and shade, because for me I find that particular aspect of composition very fascinating. Now, if you don't have a ring light, you can simply just use a torch or a lamp or anything of that nature. And as I said, it's about exploring. It's setting up your own still lives is great because it gives you a chance to really personalize your subject matter and also to explore and to play. And I think in terms of developing your creativity, your ability and your willingness to explore and to play and to try out new things is hugely important. Now, for today's drawing, I'm going to start working with a 2B. I also have a 4B and a 6B pencil in case I need them, and I have a putty rubber, which is a kneadable rubber, so I can move it and shape it around to suit what I need. So for example, this is my kneadable putty rubber, and you can see it can be shaped and moved around so that I can work with a point or a blade as part of my blending and part of my rubbing out technique or shaping up. So a kneadable rubber like that is very useful. And then I have just the standard hard rubber that I can use for a little bit more definition in terms of the drawing itself. It's also important to note that if you're just working at home and you don't have any materials, it's not important. If you only have a B pencil or a HB pencil, use that. If you just have your kids' pencils, use those. By applying either lightly or heavily a little bit more pressure onto your pencil, you can create a range of colours going from lights to mediums to darks, which will work very well for the drawing we have today. And it's the same with the idea of working with paints. If you don't have actual oil paints or acrylics or watercolours, just use whatever comes to hand, be it your kids' materials or crayons or markers and things of that nature. The most important thing is, as I said, if you're sitting at home at your kitchen table and you're watching this, just as a beginner, if you've never done it before, you're thinking, should I, just give it a go. Don't be afraid. Have some fun. As I said before, I think you will surprise yourself. We're going to start to look at the simple shape. So you can see we have the apple on the left, which is full with the small segment cut out of it, the apple on the right, which is cut in half, and then the small segment that sits in the front. I have what's known as a triangular composition. So my composition is working from left to right this way, and then down to the segment there. So I'm using a triangular composition in this space here. Okay. Now, all I want are very simple shapes. Everything is either said a circle, a square, a rectangle or a triangle, either on an individual basis or a combination of those shapes. So with the apple over on the left hand side, I want just a very simple circle. So I'm going to put that there, and you can see I'm using what I call working lines or searching lines. I'm not trying to be too perfect with the lines themselves. I am being quite soft with them because I don't want to embed too much weight into the drawing at this stage. You'll see more definition as we move to the next stage. On the left hand side, I see that, or rather on the right hand side, I can see that the cut apple sits slightly higher than the full apple here, and it's not quite as high, so it sits about there. And I'm going to just put in a soft sort of oval circle for that particular apple. If I measure my apple on the left and against my apple on the right, I can see that this apple, this half cut apple, is just slightly less than the apple on the left hand side. From there I have the segment that's cut out of this, and it sits just about here as an oval, and I'm going to put that there. And that's the first thing I need to do. So the simple circle, the little squashed circle or oval circle, and the oval here. Now from there I'm going to start putting a little bit more definition of shape onto this. I have on this composition what's known as a bird's eye view. So I'm looking down on the composition, and as a consequence I'm seeing a lot more of the top and the crown of each of the apples, but also they look a lot bigger at the top than they do at the bottom. Now, when we're drawing fruit, one of the things I like about drawing fruit and vegetables is the shapes are not perfect and they're very suggested. They're very malleable, so you can move them around. You don't have to copy exactly the same shape to create something that works. It's not like a face where if you change the shape of the nose or the eyes or the lips, while it can still be a generic face, it won't be the person that you're drawing. So I have that basic shape there. From there I have the little depth area where the stalk sits, so just that shape there, which is more of a triangular shape that I'm seeing in shadow, just there. So where just that little area of the stalk sits, and then the stalk's coming out of that just there, which I'm going to indicate very softly. Now that helps me to understand where the segment that I've cut out comes from, and it's coming back towards me very, very slightly. What we're seeing for the segment is a triangular shape, so I'm seeing a shape here and then it goes back this way. So you can see the triangle in that shape there, and that's where the segment is going to be moved into when I cut it out in terms of the drawing. From there I'm going to move over, I'm going to leave that alone for the moment, and I'm going to try and give just a little bit more shaping to this. Now, objects in a painting or a drawing are known as positive space. The space between the objects is known as negative space. So when I look at the space between the apple on the left and the half-cut apple on the right, I can see that there's a triangular shape here, and there's another triangular shape, albeit a smaller one, there. And I can see that they're almost touching, so this segment needs to move over a little bit more. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to start it from here, bring it down into a wide, and I'm going to just finish it slightly in on this previous line. And this moves back around, it's coming back this direction. Now I can see that the angle of this apple, where this one seems to move this way, this is coming in. You can see the center line coming back this direction, so it's coming back in that direction. I'm going to just mark that, and then from there I'm going to just indicate where I can see the line of the skin and the two half circles that I see into those spaces there, here, and then coming back up. Now, I don't expect any portion of this to be correct right now. All I'm doing is going to use a series of steps to add in the basic shapes that I'm looking for. So it's not about being perfect at each stage. Each stage needs only be good enough for you to get to the next level. So you will improve your drawing as you go along. So don't worry about being perfect at each step. Just put in as much as you can see and then move on to the next step. And from there, bring that down to here, and you can see it should be down a little bit deeper. There's a little bit more depth into this space, so I just need to let this come down a little bit more and then slide back up there. I'm going to leave that there for now. Now the sliver that I see. Now when I look at the angle of the sliver, it's coming slightly this direction, and it's starting just the inside of where I cut it out from here, so I can see what is a straight line coming back this direction. And I can see it goes right up to the line of the apple there, so it just hits off the line of the apple there. Now the measurement on the sliver that I've cut out sitting in front of me looks so much larger than the actual sliver space on the apple because it's closer to me. So when I measure it, I find that the sliver is the same length as the height of the apple. So the sliver, believe it or not, comes all the way down to here. Now I appreciate that looks very, very large, but that is the size measurement because this section is closer to us, so it will appear larger. And it's important to note, so that is the idea of the difference between what you know and what you see. So we know that this comes from here and it should be the same size, and it is, but when it's placed closer to us it looks larger, and that's what we're trying to show, is the fact that it is larger. Now from there I have a very narrow section of the apple that I'm seeing, so I don't wish to make it too large, so I'll just put that in here. Now this is the end part, and this comes back up. There's another triangle just here. You can see the very soft little triangle. So once again you're seeing circles, triangles, semicircles, and they're the shapes that we're engaged with in this drawing here, trying to shape those up. And it's amazing how when you learn to see the shapes, the basic shapes of circles, squares, triangles and ovals, makes it so much easier to break down the basic construct of what you're looking at. Whether you're dealing with one object or whether you're dealing with a room full of objects, doesn't matter, so long as you don't allow the detail of what you're looking at to confuse you. And this is where the step-by-step process is so important. When you're at home, you don't jump up your stairs in one fell leap. You do it in a series of steps, and drawing and painting is exactly the same. Regardless whether you're a beginner or intermediate or advanced, we all tend to work with a step-by-step process, and particularly as a beginner it's very important to give yourself that time to just apply it one step at a time and layer. So start off gently, add a little bit more detail, and so on and so forth through the various different layers, and that'll give you a feeling of control and understanding, and it won't be running away from you. You won't feel frustrated, because if it becomes challenging, that's when sometimes we lose our confidence. And as with so many things in life, if we lose our confidence when it comes to drawing and painting, we tend to walk away from it or leave it aside and not go back to it, and that's not something you wish to do. I now have the basic composition in place, so what I want to try and do now is I'm going to come in and just put in some basic sense of the shadow shapes that I see. And again, I set this up so that the shadows themselves created a feeling and a sense of design, if you like. Because for me as a painter, it's all about light and shade. I love light and shade, and I love the impact light and shade has on the sense of the painting, both in terms of the design but also spiritually. When I look at something that has a lot of light and shade, that's what really inspires me and engages me when I'm looking at another painter's work. So I'm going to put in those so you can see we have this broad general shape into that space. Now that's step 2 complete. So I've gone from the basic shapes into something a little bit more defined and a little bit more concrete. If I'm happy with this, I'll move on and I'll start giving more definition to it. If I'm not happy with this, I will stay with these basic shapes. There's no point me building detail on top of this if it's not correct, because essentially all that's doing is making it much more difficult and much more challenging for me to do. Back to the apple on the left hand side, still using my 2B, and you can see I'm holding my pencil quite far back because I want to be able to see what the lead is doing. If I am holding this as I would when I'm writing it, I don't have the same range of movement and I can't really see what I'm doing, whereas if I hold it as far back as possible, I can see far more. So I'm just going to come in and just give a little bit more definition. You can see it's quite flat on the side. Comes in, sharp angle back in here, a little bit of turn just into the way the segment is. Now this is a soft semicircle that I'm looking at here, so it's not a flat line or a straight line, it's a soft semicircle there. You can see that again, look at the triangle on the inside here, look at where the segment is cut out, it creates a triangle there, and I'm going to use that, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to round it, and that's where the other side of the segment will be joined, and I'm just going to widen this out into a much more rounded shape so that it helps to reflect the idea of the outside of the apple here, because it cannot be flat here if the apple is rounded. And it's this sort of thing that when we look into an object in a foreshortened fashion, this is what tells us that we're looking at something that's rounded and not flat. From there it comes back up, and as I said, don't worry if your apple is a slightly different shape, it'll still be an apple, it'll still work. There's wonderful little turns and unevenness on the surface of fruit, as I said, in vegetables, which I love. It makes it so much more interesting to draw. From there, just the indented space here where the stalk sits, that little dip into there, just going to draw that in there, and the 1 or 2 little things that I see. So once again, just adding a very subtle amount of detail as I go along. Now I can mark out where I see little bits of the shadows and shapes if I wish, or not, I can leave them as they are. So you can see, as I said, it's dipping in a little here, and you can see the apple is narrow at the bottom, and then you can see that lovely rounded crown on the top of it into that space. Moving back over to the half cut apple, as I said, the space between them is approximate, doesn't have to be absolute. And you can see this comes out, comes back around, and then it flattens in a little here, and then it flattens out a little there, and there's quite a rounded space that comes out, seems quite high, back in here, and it sweeps around in a very gentle fashion. So this round is quite soft, and it sweeps around out to that space there, and that's what I'm looking at here. And then once again, slightly flatter line, and back into a soft curve round into that space. Now it's quite dramatic as it comes back down here, rounded there, and then quite a deep round here. Now some of the definition of this is lost in the shadow, and that's fine, and we'll allow that when we're doing it. We'll draw in 1 or 2 of the details. You can see because it's cut through, you can see part of the core into that space, and we just draw in what we see. And again, you don't always have to understand what it is you're drawing insofar as the component parts. All you need to be able to do is to visually understand what you're looking at. So if the shapes are even or uneven, being able to mark those out and understand those for yourself. That's that section there. And then finally again, I'll just make a few refinements to the sliver. Now that gives me much more definition. So after 3 stages I have a very clear shaping of each of the pieces that I'm working with. The apple on the left, the half cut apple on the right, and the small little segment that's cut out. And that brings us to the end of part 1 on how to draw apples. Remember what I said, it's so important not to be perfect, not to try and be too perfect. Just enjoy the process, have some fun, and play with your creativity. you don't have, whether you copy my subject or whether you decide to set up your own composition and do your own apples, follow along with the same basic techniques, but be gentle with yourself. Don't expect perfection and don't try to be perfect, because realistically it doesn't exist. Other than that, remember, it's not about what you draw, but more a case of how you draw. And this applies to whether you're doing a simple apple or whether you're doing a face or a portrait. It's all about the how and not necessarily the what. Other than that, I will see you for part 2, and in part 2 I'm going to show you how to shade and create a sense of depth and weight and volume through your shading, and creating a little bit more tonal weight in terms of your pencil ranges. But I will talk to you about that in part 2. In the meantime, enjoy your creative adventures. Have a go at part 1. Remember, as I said, have some fun, and I will look forward to seeing you in part 2. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Bye.